Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. You're watching the Monday Report, and you can forward all your questions or comments on this interview with David Ndii, the chair of the President's Council of Economic Advisors, via the SMS line 22422, and the hashtag is Monday Report. David Ndii, thanks for staying with us. I believe I'm speaking with the chief economic advisor of the president.
Correct.
I want to refer to a tweet that you posted late last week, and I actually read it at the beginning. And you basically told Kenyans, as the president's chief economic advisor, that where we have reached as a country, it's either a salary delay or a debt default. You then come to the studio and tell us, actually, it's not as alarming as you may be thinking. It's just an operational kind of liquidity crunch. Which David Ndii are we to believe this evening?
Okay, let us unpack the tweet. I started by pointing out that it is reported all the time that over 60% of our revenue
goes to debt repayment.
What is the implications of that? The implications of that is that you are going to have liquidity shocks because it's very precarious. If any business, even if person, if you a lot of your money is going to pay debt, if you have a small shortfall, you don't have a cushion. Now, but let me take you back. I think want to take you back to what we said. If you read about, I think, the third piece in our manifesto, we started by observing that we are coming into government when you have something I call a perfect storm.
This is the perfect storm on, I think,
perfect
it's
storm,
3 or 4 of the
What's
manifesto.
That perfect storm? It's global turbulence. Now, underlain by a fiscal distress, and underlying that, you have the structural problems that we need to solve of unemployment, inequality, and poverty. So these things have now converged. That's what we said. And we recognize that these things have now converged. So it's going to be very tough. Now, unusually, most times, inauguration speeches are celebratory. We persuaded the president that his inauguration speech needs to send a tough message.
To Kenyans or to
Kenyans?
Global markets?
To Kenyans. Remember, he said it's tough. That is the point at which he announced that we are going to remove subsidies, or consumer subsidies, in the inauguration speech. I think our memories aren't that long. So when I was last here, we had a conversation and I told you, I think the things are very tough globally. Our fiscal situation is very tough. The markets for frontier market countries have shut. But we think we are turning the corner. We have reestablished our relationships with the banks, international banks, which is very important for refinancing our debt. But I said we are not out of the woods yet. That's the conversation we had the last time I was here. In the intervening period, I don't know whether you are following what is happening around the world to countries like Pakistan and Egypt. They're even struggling to pay for our tea. Yeah? We've had a crisis of tea because they don't have the US dollars to pay for our tea. So I think what you're trying to do is, I think we need to sober up. I think somehow there seems to be an expectation that some magic is going to happen.
Is your message,
and make these challenges go away immediately.
Is your message being heard in government? Because I'll tell you this. In August last year, President William Ruto, then candidate Ruto, met think tanks and economists. And they did a presentation to him about the state of the economy. They warned him that unless we reschedule our debts or restructure them or something of the sort, or unless we reduce high government spending, then some of the things that have been seen over the last 1 week or so will be seen. And I had a chance to speak to some of these economists over the last week or so, and they say that we warned the candidate then that unless you put in place drastic measures, delayed salaries, possibly putting off of loans or so forth, would become a very real reality in this country. Did no one take note of that in August last year, David? This is not a shock that those loan repayments were coming.
You're preaching to the choir.
Through.
That is what it was in the inauguration speech. But now, when you say you're preaching to the choir, what have we done? First, as I said, even this financial year, I don't know whether people recall, we found that the previous government had overspent outside the budget 100 billion shillings and approved another 100 billion shillings. We then sat together. If you ask the treasury people, they tell you we had a night of long knives, went up to 4 o'clock in the morning, and we told them that money is not, we are not going to accommodate that, because if we had accommodated that, this financial year, the planned budget deficit was 800 billion. It would have gone to 1 trillion. So we say that money has to be not only be accommodated by reducing other things, but in fact, we are going to bring the budget deficit down. The program budget deficit this ending financial year was 62.2% of GDP. If you read the budget policy statement now, it's 5.7 this year.
So where does...
supplement, let me finish, so people understand how government works. The thing you want to watch in terms of austerity is the budget deficit, not absolute numbers, as a percent of GDP. So this financial year, we have revised the budget deficit that the last administration had agreed with the IMF from 6.2% of GDP to 5.7% of GDP. For the coming financial year, our first budget, we are bringing that down to 4.4% of GDP against 5. If you look at the previous forecast, it would have been 5.5%.
Are you basing that on reduction in expenditure or increased revenue?
Both.
Because mostly your revenue targets, they're saying it's not realistic.
Actually, our revenue targets are very realistic. We are not changing the revenue target. It's 17% of GDP. That's what it was last year. It's actually mostly expenditure cuts. Now, where we get mixed up is all this propaganda, because people don't know. They say the government is spending 1 billion shillings on that. It has allocated 1 billion shillings on the other.
Can I read you some of the numbers?
Yes.
State House budget doubled to 8.85 billion from 4.37 billion under the previous government. We're waiting to see the impact of the 50 CASs on our overall budget, estimated to be at least 500 million shillings in salaries and benefits to begin with. Offices of the president, his deputy, the prime CS allocated 802 million shillings to buy motor vehicles, Dr. Ndii.
That's the point. Once you put the absolute numbers, you cost unnecessary. Those are extremely small numbers. The budget is 3.7 trillion shilling.
In an economy where every shilling counts, David Ndii,
the key thing is,
it's fair to call them small numbers.
Look, you have a new government. Okay, there are certain things it has to do. Let me start by making something Kenyans don't like to hear. Politics has to be paid for. People don't run for office and win government just to make sacrifices.
Was that part of the plan? That was your manifesto?
The amount of money you're talking about, if you're bringing down, you ask what else is giving. There are other things which are giving to accommodate. The point is the budget deficit going up or is the budget deficit going down? The budget deficit is going down. Okay, that's because absolute numbers change every year. GDP from year to year increases by about 1 trillion shillings in nominal terms. So if you start counting nominal shillings, you will completely suffer from money illusion because the zeros are too many and most people can just process that.
But David Ndii, when civil servants hear you tonight and those in positions to spend, don't they get a sense from you that they can
let me tell you, having said that, let me tell you something.
To overall deficit?
Having said that, my own sense, bringing down, the question is whether that's even a battle. If you spend your time just fighting to bring down
government spending,
you are not going to do anything else. I have watched even the president frustrated. He said they're trying to put, on foreign trips. We are only going, this is the limit of the number of people that is going to take on the foreign trips. He gets there are 3 times the number. Where did the people come from? No one knows. They have their own ways. Some are paid for by donors, others by NGOs. There's an entire thing.
And others by the taxpayer.
You can't even tell. Let me tell you, because you would have to order an audit. The truth is, it is true. We have a very profligate government. That I will grant you. Okay? The preoccupation of I used to interact with government about 30 years ago. And there was a sense of frugality. What I have found is the preoccupation with benefits and perks and personal privileges in government at the top level for me is something I find totally reprehensible.
Have you mentioned this to the president?
Yes, surely we talk about it all the time. You can, but the question, which battles are you going to fight? Okay, those are systemic things. You gotta find systemic ways of doing it. Let me tell you, you talk to the people in the government were to tell you, the last couple of weeks, we sat down with ministries in State House. This has never happened before. Going through their budget, state by state department, line by line by line. What is this for? Why is this here? I think we managed to cut something that 35 billion shillings. We thought we would actually be able to do a lot more. It's a lot of work. We worked 18 hours a day for about a week, including with sort of members. So it is an unrelenting thing that you have. It's not going to change overnight. It's a culture. Which is why some would ask, why don't we focus on the absolute numbers? You keep downplaying them, but salaries are delayed. No. The reason why I said you then go back. I said, this thing, when you said we have a perfect storm, there's going to be turbulence. That's what we're saying. Then we drift back and say, so which battles are we going to fight? So you have a perfect storm, a government with a plan gets into office. Let me tell you. And then picks which battles to fight. You absolutely must. And if you fight every battle, you're going to lose. Taxpayers don't have the same luxury. Let me tell you. They don't. Look, listen. Kibaki himself, at some point, said, you know what? 30% of the government money is wasted. So just focus on what you are able to do. Did you hear him saying that? Yes. In fact, the figure that is often quoted, that 2 billion shillings by former president correction every day, it's a distortion of what Kibaki said. Because what happened is, at the time, 30% of the government budget would have translated to about that 2 billion shilling figure. Yeah. So, but he didn't say corruption. He said wasted. So are you admitting tonight that we could run a much leaner government, but to do so would take away resources, time from... Government is extremely wasteful. There is not a single day that I'm not exasperated by not just how wasteful it is, but by how deliberate it is and how unbothered people are. And independent institutions, control of budget, the Auditor General, investigative agencies are unable to rein in... They are unable to. On this wastage. Totally. They are helpless. David Ndii, as the Chief Economic Advisor, if you have no answers for us, what are Kenyans to do? No, that's the truth. You know, I don't sort of mean by that. But it's not just this government. Governments are very wasteful. But we do need to put in systems that try and get more value of more money. We probably could strengthen the Auditor General's office so it does a lot more value for money. Audits, automation. There's a lot of automation, particularly around procurement, that could help government be more cost-effective. Automation of procurement, part of IFMIS, has been on the cards for something like 10 years, for as long as I can remember. Somehow, it never happens. So how sure are we that there won't be wastage in the Hustler Fund? Which Hustler last Fund, time promised us... No, that is not operating inside government, and it was deliberate. There are very many people who are unhappy about that. MPs, many of them wanted it to be like CDF, so that they control it. There are lots of people who are unhappy about that. But the truth is, government is extremely wasteful. But the question is, by the way, even if we could focus 100% on reducing waste, and whether you could translate that money into the kind of economic impact that we are focusing on in the short run, it's not so, because again, we tend to conflate government budget with economy. They are not the same thing. The things you need to do on the economy, most of them don't depend on government budget. They depend on policy. And policy change doesn't cost much money. It is difficult, but it's not really, the correlation between public spending and economic outcomes is very little.
David Ndii, as someone who served in civil society, did you imagine that you'd sit in a studio one day and tell Kenyans government is as wasteful as you have told them this evening?
I think
and you almost sound helpless.
I think I have written about
as an economic advisor.
This is probably something I have written about more than 20 publications. There is the last report I wrote about this for AfriCog when we had a meeting with the former Auditor General. And he talked about, on his retirement, he did have a valedictory where he talked about budgeted corruption. And I found that very intriguing. So I had a chat with him, and I decided to get more curious. So I did some research and published a paper. Its title is called Highway Robbery, something. You can find it. It's published by AfriCog. That's only about a year and a half ago. And it documents just whether, in fact, you do have budgeted corruption. And it demonstrates, I only looked at 4 infrastructure sectors, I think roads, power, water, and something else. And there are some numbers there. So the question of whether I have been alive to the fact that government is... I used to do anti-corruption work for many years. I was one of the pioneers of doing empirical anti-corruption work. I am totally aware of this, and that's why I'm saying it's an institutional reform challenge.
How much budgeted
it is not something...
Could we be at a time like this?
I don't remember the numbers precisely, but they are huge. In those 4 infrastructure sectors, you're probably talking about between 20 and 30% of project costs.
Then or now?
It's not long ago. This was about 2 years ago, and I was looking at the projects over the last 7-8 years.
I'm due for a break, David Ndii, but before I take that break, so what proposals have you given to the president to reduce this wastefulness? And if you haven't, why should Kenyans trust you as his
Let me be honest with you. It's a question of sequencing. What do you prioritize? Our priority is to deliver on certain economic transformation objectives. Those things are outside of government, and they don't actually depend much on government. If you focus on institutional reform of government, that's another thing altogether. It is very politically consumes a lot of political capital. It destabilizes government. You probably won't be able to deliver on your other things. So, to be honest, if you ask me what the trade-off is, the trade-off is first, you focus on the big bang economic things we want to do. And on the institutional reform, you do that on an incremental way, in a manner that, because there's an institutional reform problem. There is no quick wins in institutional reform. So we focus on the quick wins and the institutional reforms. Once you have stabilized the economy, once you go, that's the time you do. You cannot begin destabilizing the government when at the same time you're trying to stabilize the economy.
David Ndii, hang on there. Very interesting thoughts. Let's take a short break. We come back, we continue with that interview. We've got the chairperson of the President's Council of Economic Advisors, David Ndii, here with us in studio. We carry on with that interview after this short break. You're watching the Monday Report. Stay with us. We'll be right back.